Why would a God allow evil and suffering?
So I think most everything about God, even in all his vastness and bigness, can be seen in our humanity. I just have a newborn baby. We just had it 2 months ago. Well, one of the first things you have to do when a baby's born is give it a vaccine, right? And so you know it's going to be painful. You know it's going to be hard, and you know your baby's going to cry and scream, and it's heart-wrenching because you don't want to do anything to hurt your daughter or your son. But yet you know there's a greater good that's going to come about from that.
Welcome to Reaching Out. I'm your host, Zack Carter. Please join me as I speak with a diverse group of people to find out their thoughts on religion, politics, and culture.
Well, thanks everybody for joining us for another episode of Reaching Out with Zack Carter. Today, I have a special guest in my mother's dining room yet again. His name is Pastor Erik. Pastor Erik, tell us a little about yourself before we kind of dive into what we're going to be talking about today.
Sure. I've been pastoring for like 13 years. I started out, I went to Southeastern University, got my degree there in psychology and Bible, and then went on to be a youth pastor. Was a youth pastor for about 12 years, and recently have transitioned into being a worship pastor and music pastor because I did music all along. But now, as I'm getting older, it's a little bit too old for youth. I moved into that full time, and then I do graphic design as another aspect of my job that I do now.
Oh, so. Awesome. Did you always feel like you were supposed to be a pastor, that you were supposed to be doing that?
Yeah, I got called. That's like a Christianese word, but just felt like God was leading me very strongly to be a pastor when I was about 15 years old, and kind of just went after it and never really looked back. And just kind of set my life around it, and it's been an awesome journey, man. I've loved it.
What's been the hardest thing about being a pastor?
Seeing people that you're like pouring your life into, and like you're passionate about them having a relationship with Jesus, and you're modeling it, and you're talking to them about it, and you just know that there's no better way to live than to follow Jesus, and it's not the easiest thing, but it's the best thing. And then seeing them kind of look at that and then choose a different path that I know is destructive to their lives, and it's heartbreaking. You just want them to make the right choices, and just a lot of times they don't. A lot of times they come around later, so that's super rewarding. But which I think you were one of those.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably the toughest part, just the heartache of seeing people do things that hurt them.
Yeah, absolutely. And what would you say, is the most rewarding thing that's been about being a pastor?
I'm seeing literally generations changed. So like, you can have a student who's coming into it, their life's a disaster, their home life's a disaster, their personal life's a disaster, and then they have an encounter with Christ, and they turn their whole life around, and like you know that they were in a vicious cycle that was going to repeat from generation to generation, but in a moment you just changed the course of history. Like now their kids are going to grow up in a Christian home with Christian values, and they're going to make good choices for their family, and not repeat the cycles. And so that's like, holy cow, man! I'm not just affecting one person's life; I'm affecting whole generations of future generations of people. So.
Yeah, very interesting. Well, let's dive in. One of the I kind of wanted to dive into tough questions about God, tough questions about Christianity. You've kind of touched on it a little bit, so I kind of want to go with one of the things you were saying, as far as you were saying that you believe following Jesus is the best way to go. So why do you believe in God? Why do you believe in Jesus?
Well, if you're being honest, my parents laid a foundation. They took me to church all the time. They exposed me to things, about God. Not everyone gets that opportunity. Some people never go to church in their life. They don't know anything about it. They don't know about what it looks like or means to have a genuine relationship with Jesus. And so, I chose that because. And my parents weren't like super, passionate, like, whatever, had their life all together. but they just made a decision. We're going to go to church as a family. We're going to do that. And so a relationship that they had that might have been shallow or even just in a low season, you know, because they're Christians. They love God and they serve Him passionately now, you know, 30 some years later. But in that season it was a valley. And but they put me in the right places, and I just saw people's lives who followed Christ, and I was like, man, if that's what your life looks like when you put Jesus first, then I want it. I want my life to look like that. I want to be that kind of person of character, and so that would be probably the main reason is like just that the principles of God are they're a moral authority, you know, that comes from something higher than ourselves. So I mean, I know a lot of people who don't believe in God, they say that like social things can dictate morality. Like, what's the good of the whole? That you can discover morality by what's the good of the whole. But last time I checked, people and everywhere don't follow that. I don't see people putting others before themselves in a general sense, and like who are passionate about being selfless instead of selfish. I see systemic selfishness, you know, across the board. And so when you're writing your own rules, you know, when you're saying, oh, well, I think social things determine that this is right and this is wrong, you're deciding. There's nothing bigger than you that's making that decision, you know? Whereas when you acknowledge that there's a God in heaven who's your creator, who has authority in all things, you know, who created the notion of morality, then you have something when something that challenges you to go a higher ground morally, and you know that that's right because they're the authority. There is no one higher. There's nothing higher. Then you can be challenged because God asks us to do things that we probably don't want to do, or I guarantee we don't want to do. We want to go our own way, but He says no. There's a higher way, and it's selfless. It's completely and utterly selfless. Then I find myself having to submit my life to that and feeling good about it because someone greater than me is the one who told me what I should do. Whereas I'm basically, what other people are saying is, I'm the God of my life, and I'll decide what's right and wrong, which leaves you with a whole people group of different notions of what right and wrong is. So that would be one thing. I want to follow the one who's right, and I don't want to follow myself because I'm not that smart.
And you said, you know, you came to know God because, you know, your family helped instill it. So you saw the people around you. You saw good things coming from their lives. What would be your best sales pitch to somebody who didn't grow up in that atmosphere? Like, this is why you need to believe in God. This is
right.
You know.
I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't try to like necessarily coerce them into believing God, because that's not really how it works. You don't really go half in or half out. It's either all in or all out, because you can't experience God in His fullness unless you're all in. And so I would probably challenge them to come and see. You know, come to church, meet people, grow some relationships with people that really love Jesus, and just have an open mind. Don't draw any conclusions. Just come completely open-minded and put some time in and come and see what it's like. And I have tons of friends who aren't Christians, and I know what their life looks like, and if they're happy or joyful or whatever. And because I think when you come and see, when you get in an environment where, and this may sound strange, but where God's presence is, and where you just have you know how it's like sometimes you just have a sense of things, like a sixth sense, sort of like I feel like someone's looking at me, and you know, you turn in someone is. It's like that kind of we call it I call it the knower. It's like, you know when you don't know, sort of thing. And I think if you come and you really have an open mind, you really engage a little bit. If you come into the church per se, which is people, not a building necessarily, but into a group of people who passionately love Jesus and are serving them with their whole life, I think it's almost irresistible. You have to like get out of that environment to really start to separate yourself from it. Now, granted, that's a healthy church. You could be if you're in an unhealthy church, you'll run away from that as fast as you possibly can, because it's broken, and the power of God's diluted, and it's completely and utterly hypocritical. Of course, none of us are perfect, so we're all hypocrites in some sense. But there needs to be a genuine, deep, passionate desire to follow Jesus. If you're in that kind of church, and it's experienceable, I don't know if that's a word, but it's able to be experienced, or you're able to have a true relationship with those people, I think it's life changing. Like no person I've ever brought into my inner circle has totally rejected God. They've always ended up being like, wow, there's something to this. You know what I mean? So, and then lastly, obviously, the resurrection is huge. There's so much reasonable historical evidence of the resurrection. It's really difficult to just look at the evidence and say, oh, it didn't happen. When you have number one, women reporting the resurrection. In that time, women were completely irreparable. You know what I mean? They had bad reputations. They couldn't be a witness in a court of law.
Yeah,
their testimony was invalid. And for the authors to use them as their first witnesses would be absolutely false, logical. It don't make no sense at all. You have the brother of Jesus ending up giving who rejected his brother, said, "You're not the Son of God." Post, he ends up dying, giving his life for his brother Jesus, because he believes in what he preached and what he said.
So to be clear, it was James that was the brother of Jesus that initially said, "I don't believe you're the Son of God."
Right.
And then after Jesus died, he said, "I want to give my life."
Right.
And this thought, I will give my life, and he gave his life for the thought that his brother resurrected and was the Son of God.
Right, which is. It's nutty when you think, if you have a brother.
Yeah, I do. I have two. So,
you're like, not going to happen.
Yeah, I wouldn't say either of them are God.
Right.
Yeah.
Thirdly, even the detractors admitted an empty tomb. So they didn't deny that the tomb was empty. They only denied the means in which it was empty, that it was stolen instead of resurrected.
Yeah.
And so if you were a detractor, you would say, oh yeah, it's still there. I've seen the bones. It's there. It's over. And we don't find even his detractors saying that. Or
why would the detractors say that?
Because if the body's there, then he's definitely dead. They didn't deny that the tomb was empty. They said, yeah, it's empty, but it was because he was stolen.
Yeah.
They could have said it's not empty. He's still in there.
He's still in there. Yeah.
And they could have proven that. That would have been easy.
Put some dead guy's bones in the tomb or whatever.
Right. So the guarded tomb that's got like a ton, about 2,000-pound rock in front of it, that's sealed. Somehow they came and beat those guys up and rolled that, in first century, rolled that. They brought the crane and moved
the crane and moved the 2,000-ton
and
boulder.
Moved the stones, all while the guys were asleep. It's kind of a crazy story. And then lastly, Joseph of Arimathea gives he's a wealthy, like Sanhedrin, like a political religious guy sort of. He's wealthy, well known, gives his grave up. So at the time, Mark's writing this. He's writing this book of the Bible like 7 years after. Even if it's 15 or however many, it's said that it was 7. It's the earliest book that.
You said who was?
Mark,
I thought Paul wrote the earliest.
He probably wrote the earliest scripture, one of the earliest gospel.
Oh, earliest gospel.
Yeah.
Sorry,
I probably didn't make that clear.
Okay.
And so if Mark writes this story or tells this story or speaks to this story, the whole community could say, no, that ain't true. That's bogus. You can't put that out there. You can't say that he had Joseph of Arimathea's tomb. Yeah, right. We all know him, and you didn't get his tomb. Or yeah, right. Jesus didn't, raise from the dead. You didn't see him. None of that happened. But you don't see that. You see, rather than it being squashed and forgotten about, you see it exploding, so that thousands and thousands of people in that community turn their life over to a risen Christ. And then there was no, and back then they used to put shrines in front of dead holy men. They used to honor them. There's bunches of them. Jesus' tomb has no shrines, no honor, no any of those things. Why? Because his bones aren't there. He's not there to do that with. So.
Oh, very cool. Okay, so let's dive into, so that those were great answers. Let's dive into some arguably a little bit tougher questions. So, one of the big questions that's asked about God in general is, why would a God allow evil and suffering, especially if he's a good God?
Right,
how would you respond to that question?
I would say that it's like so I think most everything about God, even in all his vastness and bigness, can be we can be seen in our humanity. So like we can kind of witness it in our own lives and our own thoughts. So for example, it's like I just have a newborn baby. We just had it 2 months ago. Well, one of the first things you have to do when a baby's born is give it, or in my case, give her a vaccine, right? And so it's going to be painful. It's going to be hard, and your baby's going to cry and scream, and it's heart wrenching because you don't want to do anything to hurt your daughter or your son. But yet there's a greater good that's going to come about from that. And so, and you do it anyway. You look at them with their crying eyes and with their, knowing that needle's going to hurt, and you say, "Go ahead, doc, do that," because there's a greater good that's going to come about. And so we're talking from a human perspective, which is so little compared to a God perspective, where he knows what every decision is going to turn people, what every path is going to take. He knows exactly what's going to happen. And obviously I can't no one, if they tell you can, they're lying. Can explain in exactness, formulaic, why God allows bad things. But we can just draw you to examples that from our real lives that we all know and understand. And so I believe with all my heart that first of all, it's because God knows what this negative event is going to bring about, and ultimately may be good. Which the question of why does God allow suffering kind of almost even goes back to our perspective on God. So like if you think that you're the moral authority, that you can decide what's just and unjust, that you're God, then you can shake your finger at God and say, "Oh, how could you do this?" But when you know that God is the highest authority, there is no other authority. If he says it, then it's true. Like for example, in the movie Bruce Almighty, there's this scene where Bruce Almighty puts his hands behind his back and is like testing Morgan Freeman, a godlike character, and he's like, he puts with 2 hands behind his back, he says, he asks, "What number am I holding up?" And he has a 7 behind his back. He has 5 of his fingers up on one hand, 2 on the other. And so he goes to, God says it's a 7. And he holds just one hand up to say, "No, it's 5." And he has 7 fingers. Well, why does he have 7 fingers? Because God said the number was 7. So it doesn't matter. It's like if this wall is white, he's the God who created everything. Like it says he spoke a word and the sun and the moon were created. So if God looks at a white wall and says that wall is red, then it's red instantly. You know what I mean? So that's who God is. If you understand that mentality that I am not God. God is a loving cosmic being who knows infinitely more than I do. And so how can I shake my finger at him and say, "You didn't do it the way I would have, so you're wrong"? Who am I? I know nothing. And I mean, obviously you can never prove this, but I bet one day when I stand before God and I see all of his wisdom and all his blessing, I'm going to look at the suffering in my life and say, "Thank God for that suffering. Thank you that you did that." And obviously I'm not saying that's easy to swallow, or I know it's very, very difficult. But most things in Christianity aren't easier because God's calling us to greater submission to him, a closer way to walk with him and understand him. And so I know it might be a hard thing to wrestle with, but when you understand how good God is, how he literally can be nothing but good. The Bible says there's no darkness in him at all, 0. So if you trust that, then no matter what God does, it's good. Why? Because he said it is. And so I don't expect people who don't follow Jesus to understand that, but that's the truth.
Okay.
So.
Well, and let me push you on that for a second. So the Bible has a few sections, and this kind of goes into what you were saying. You might have the same answer for this question, but it has a few sections where as we read it, it looks like there's some harsh punishments for what we might consider seemingly like innocuous mistakes. So Ananias and Sapphira being struck down for lying about how much charity they gave to church, and Elijah called down some bears to maul kids for making fun of his bald head. How do you reconcile these stories with God being merciful and all loving?
So taking the first story actually I want to briefly talk about the first one first. So Elijah gets attacked, or some kids get attacked by bears because they were mocking God's prophet. All right. So the course of the Old Testament takes a course of, I mean, technically it's from the beginning of time, but if you're talking like historical dates, it's several thousand years, right? The New Testament only covers about the 30 years and some, maybe 30 years after, maybe total of 60 years. So you have a book that contains stories from 60 years versus a book that contains stories from thousands of years. So
you're saying the New Testament contains a small amount of time. Old Testament is huge.
It's like I can't even list how many times more. It's like 100.
It's huge.
200 times more time. So obviously, once again, human example. So like, let's say you're a parent, which I mean I am, and you have an older kid, and like maybe you're just a parent who you despise lying, like you don't want that to even start in your child's life. And so let's say they tell a significant lie, and so I know it's the case in my house. I'm sure it's the case in houses across the country. The parents decide we gotta cut this out right out the gate, and so they really enforce some really strict punishments because they're like, man, I don't want this to ever happen again. And I know, like, even in my case, when I was a kid growing up, I lied one time, and I got severely punished. But man, the next time I thought about lying, I was like, I'm not sure I want to do that again. And honestly, God, I think I may have lied like 2 other times to my parents, in my whole childhood life, because I did not want to get punished. And so, I think if you think about it, it's like, there's thousands and thousands, if not millions of people alive during the course of these stories. Do you think that they were the only ones? You think they were the only teenagers ever that laughed at a prophet or something? Do you think in the New Testament, the Ananias and Sapphira, do you think they were the only person ever who lied about how much they sold their property for or sold something for? Like, I'm sure that happened, many, many, many times with many people. But God, in his authority, he chose, but for whatever reason, these 2 particular stories to set a precedence what was highly untolerated to him. And you don't see him like, it's not like every other story, and he killed some more people for insulting Elijah, and he killed some more people and some more people. You see one time there and one time in the New Testament and in the Old Testament, these type of that seem like out off the wall. Like, why would a good God do that? That don't make any sense. But I believe he's just setting a one-time precedence. Like, I'm really unhappy with this. Why? Because that's beneficial to the whole, because the whole is not entirely clear on what God's think about this. But in one story, he makes it entirely clear what his thoughts are on this, which is beneficial to the whole people, extravagantly. And so, it's a greater good per se. And one last thing is, we always view death as a punishment. We always view death as a punishment. Like, if God kills somebody, then they were being punished. But there's stories in the Bible that indicate that's not true. That actually, on occasions, God kills people who he loves and is passionate about, and like are people he would say are after his own heart, that like follow him the closest. And basically, he has this notion that they're too good for this world, like that he wants them to come be with him. And so, if you're the creator of heaven, the most awesome, amazing place anyone could ever go to, and you have this grungy earth that's full of sin and hate and all this other stuff, it's not exactly a punishment to kill you. It's a reward on some sense. So I mean, the Bible never says whether Ananias and Sapphira were eternally separated from God. He could have killed them and be like, guys, I needed to do that to set a precedence, but welcome to heaven. And they'd be like, oh, thanks, this is awesome. Not missing anything back there. So like, when we change our perspective, and that's really the beginning of every question, is who is God? Is he good or is he evil? If you have the perspective that he's good, then everything makes sense. But if you have the perspective he's bad, then everything goes wrong. So.
Yeah. Interesting. Some may ask that it seems like God sends good people to hell in the Bible, in the sense of, they're doing the right thing, trying to be nice to people, trying to be kind, trying to live a good life, but yet God condemns them to hell.
Oh, you're talking about people who don't put their faith in Christ but live a
moral life.
Quote, moral life.
That's a better way to say it. Yeah, people who live a moral life, but yet they might still go to hell. Why would a good God do that?
Because he's just. That's why. Because he is utter perfection in every way, shape, and form. And there's a word most people don't know. It's called holy, and it means like set apart. Like you're so far out of my league, it's unbelievable. And it's with God, it's so far that we literally don't deserve to be in His presence. Like it is like a dirt smudge on a white, Afghan or something. I don't know, something really white, and or wedding dress. It's like a dirt blood stain on a wedding dress, and just God cannot be a part of any evil whatsoever. He cannot be in the presence of evil. We know that Satan, God's arch enemy, was cast out of heaven when he sinned. When he did anything that was contrary to God's law, he was cast out. And so that's ultimately, it doesn't matter if you've ever committed one single sin, anything, then you are infinitely less than God, because He is perfect in every aspect. And it's kind of like, and it's not even like God has to like strike you down or anything. It's like if somebody runs into a power line, the power line wasn't mad at them when they died. It wasn't the power line was like, I hate that guy. No, the power line is just so powerful, your body can't absorb its power, And so that's kind of like how we are, but in a spiritual sense, not in a physical sense. In our sinful state, we can't absorb the power of God. It's just it's destructive to evil, And so that's why He provided His Son, Jesus Christ, so that someone as powerful as Himself, His Son, could make a way for us. And so Jesus was the ultimate sacrifice, the ultimate advocate who took our punishment for us, so that now when He looks at us, He no longer sees a single sin, a single thing we've ever done wrong. All He sees is the punishment that was placed upon His Son. So we're shielded from that power because we're made holy, we're made perfect, And Jesus is the only one that can do that. No one else can do that. And so that's why I'm passionate about wanting people to confess Christ and to live a life for God, is because I don't want them to stand before God not being made holy by the sacrifice of Jesus, because it's not gonna be a good experience, Not because God's evil, but because you can't absorb His power,
Interesting.
So that's kind of what I would say is, no matter how good you think you are, you're not good enough, and you need a path to be good enough, and Jesus is the only path.
So a lot of the examples you're pulling from are from the Bible. I think it would be important to begin talking about the validity of the Bible. I know nowadays people say the Bible contradicts science. Let's take one point. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on it. Do you believe the Bible contradicts evolution, or do you believe it complements it? What are your thoughts on the Bible and evolution?
So currently I don't believe in evolution, but God's so big and so vast. I'm not going to put Him in a box, you know what I mean? But from what I can gather from the Bible, which is my ultimate authority, I have no authority outside of God's word, is that He said it and it was done instantly. It didn't happen over a long period of time. Now, obviously, that's macro evolution, which is like species changing to other species.
Like apes into humans.
Right, exactly. But I believe in microevolution for sure. That birds develop different types of beaks, for certain food sources and those and those kind of things. But for me, crossing over species line is just really far out there to me. And but like I'm not gonna say you're gonna be eternally separated from God if you believe that. You know what I mean? So it's more just a heartfelt conviction. But you can have a different one. I don't agree with it at all, but I don't think that your salvation hinges on it.
Yeah. Okay. So with the Bible, before it was written down, the Jewish people would pass down a lot of their traditions orally, and I was curious on why you think we can trust the Bible, especially at the beginning when it was being passed down before it was ever written down, then eventually it was written down. So why should we trust it?
Because oral tradition was held in much higher esteem back then. Like it was vital to their culture. It was vital to every part of their life. They didn't have the internet. They didn't have mail. They didn't, they had no way to preserve their things amongst their communities, but with oral tradition. But the Jewish people were very committed to the written recording of their history. So they did write it down, but it was only a few select people. It wasn't everybody in the whole community.
Yeah.
So it was more the priestly class, the ones who were in charge of keeping this sacred information. And so, so you got two things there. They did write it down, and number two, that they continue to pass it down generation to generation in a culture where oral tradition was, paramount. Did I answer that?
That answers that question, yeah. So, a lot of people read the Bible, they see a lot of contradictions. There's no way you can get into all the questions about everything that people see as contradictions. I took down a couple that I think would be interesting to discuss. So in Ephesians, Paul says, "For by grace you're saved through faith, not of works." And in James 2, it says, "You see then how that by works man is justified and not by faith alone." So that seems like it contradicts itself. Does it contradict itself? Does it not? How do you reconcile those two passages, those two people who kind of look like they have different perspectives on salvation?
That's good. So you can't really, if you're doing proper, I don't know if scholarship's the word, but researching properly, you're not going to take anything in the Bible in a particular verse. You have to look at the Bible as a whole document from beginning to end. Unfortunately, it takes a lifetime to read it that much to really give grasp on the whole picture of the Bible. But I can assure you that when you examine it in those terms, everything will become much more clear. And so Jesus' life is the life of Christ, and his teachings are full of paradox, where it's this, it's not all the way right, and it's not all the way left. It's somewhere in the middle, and it's like grace and justice, right? So if you only practice justice, you have missed grace. If you only practice grace, you miss justice. The how to walk in those things is somewhere in the middle, like, and you'll see Jesus create that paradox where he's like, he humbles the proud but exalts the humble. So, and that means like, so if I come to Jesus and I'm like, "Oh, look at me, Jesus, look what I'm doing. I'm doing so great for you. I'm so awesome." Then he's going to say, "I don't know if you're doing that good." But if you come to me saying, "Gosh, man, Jesus, I keep failing, I keep screwing up," he's going to say, "Man, you're doing so good, man. Just keep pushing." That's that balance of how you approach him is the way that he addresses you. Once again, it's the same thing in real life. Like, how you're approached is how you respond, in a parent relationship, in a boss-employee relationship, anywhere. And so that's what that's about, is Paul saying, you're saved by grace, and that's it. And so James understands that as well, but he wants to balance that argument a little bit and say, yeah, it's by grace, but I need you to recognize that when you understand the love of God and when you've experienced His grace, you're gonna want to do good works. And if you don't want to do good works, I'm not sure you've experienced God's love and grace, because if you did, then you would. That's what he's trying to bring clarity to what Paul's saying, that it's not one without the other. It's not just works, and it's not just faith in its technical. It's somewhere in the middle. It's like it's a works that is driven by grace. That when you understand the grace of God and how much He's forgiven you of and how much He's loved you, how can you not want to do good works for Him? It's not if then the other than. They literally go down the same path at the same speed. You can't separate them. And so it's not a contradiction. That's often why Christians fight all the time, is because they look at Jesus' words and they're like, oh, look here, this is what Jesus said we should do this over here. And then the other person's like, well, wait, He said we should do something different over here. And they're passionate about it. This is what God wants. This is what God wants. When they don't look at the whole concept and what was the situation, what was the scenario, what was Jesus addressing, and when you do, you're like, oh, He's actually somewhere in the middle there. And here's the thing. Can we navigate the middle on our own? Can we find the middle? Can we walk in the middle on our own? Absolutely not. Your personality, your inklings are going to lean you toward one side of that pendulum by nature. It's only by His power within us, by the Holy Spirit, who reveals to us, hey, you might be being a little bit harsh on the justice side. Well, hey, you might be a little bit too gracious. You might need to let them know that because you care about them, you love them, that they're going the wrong course. You need to be a little bit more just. And so we can't make up that line on our own. We have to be led by His Holy Spirit, which the Bible clearly indicates is accessible to the person who puts their faith in God and invites them into their life to be their Lord and Savior.
Okay, very cool. Let's do one more, and then we'll move on to the next question. So, Jesus tells His followers in both Matthew, Mark, and Luke that truly I say to you, there's some standing here who will not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming in His kingdom. So it seems like Jesus is telling His followers, hey, some of you guys aren't going to die because you're going to come up and when I come back, you're going to be alive, and I'm going to bring you back to heaven. So how do you reconcile that? Because we're 2,000 years later and all these people are dead. So
the answer to that one is I don't know. There's many things that Jesus says that nobody knows what the implications were. I mean, that was a reference sort of to a Revelation type context where He was kind of laying out sort of what would happen in the end times. So I can't really say what that means.
Okay.
But I know that. I mean, my guess was that He was trying to inspire them on some sense, and or it was an analogy of some degree. I can't really speak to that.
Okay, fair enough. I was trying to find a question where I could stump you, so I'm feeling proud of myself.
I don't think anyone knows the answer to that question, so
you're probably right. All right, so changing gears a little bit. A lot of people, and you were kind of talking about the difference between showing up in a good church and showing up into a church that's not so good earlier. A lot of people are kind of turned off from the church because they say, the church has done a lot of evil things. They promoted slavery back in the day. Sometimes we see pastors having affairs. Looks like the church just wants my money when I walk in the doors on Sunday. How do you promote the church and say, hey, this is something that you should be a part of? Would you say it's not as corrupt as people may think, or you kind of get what I'm asking?
It's not as corrupt. That's quite a premise to start from. So it's how do you define corrupt? I'm being honest. Like is corrupt that the pastor is embezzling from the people money? Is corrupt that people just aren't perfect? Is it what exactly does corrupt equal?
Sure. Yeah, sure.
I would say that corrupt in most churches and any organization or any group known to man, is it corrupt in that people aren't perfect? Then absolutely. Then if that's your definition of corrupt, then it's corrupt, and I'm corrupt, and everyone who hears this is corrupt.
Yeah. Okay.
And so, yeah, there's humans. There's humans in the church.
Yeah.
And we're all hypocrites because we don't do everything we say that people should. We make mistakes. We do all that. But to me, that's in essence, when it's not like immorally corrupt or like criminal corrupt, then that's anything. There's nothing on earth you can go to where people aren't broken and hurting and have issues in their life. But the beauty of the church is that that doesn't define us in the church, because we're defined by the goodness of Jesus. You know what I mean? Like the Bible says that we are made the righteousness of Christ. In other words, we're made right by Him. And so I would say, if you think it's corrupt, that's the reason why you should come, because we're corrupt and you're corrupt, but you have no solution. And so you should come and find the solution in Jesus, and find some people who are working really hard at allowing God to transform their life and become less and less and less corrupt until it's almost negligible. It's not even detected, And I know people like that. I know people who it doesn't seem like there's a bad bone in their body, and so that's what I'd say.
Okay, good. It's a good answer. Why would someone choose Christianity over all the other religions? Don't they all pretty much teach the same thing? Do good to others, be nice to people.
Yeah. And if that could get you to heaven, it'd be awesome.
Yeah.
But it can't. And so you can be as good as you want to, and you're not going to spend eternity with God, because you're not. It doesn't matter how good you are. You're not good enough. How high is the bar for good enough? What if am I going to miss the good goal by 1 point? How do I have 5 more to go? When I'm about to pass away, and I'm like, somebody come in here so I can be good. Bless you. I love your outfit.
Yeah.
And then you miss it by a little bit, like. How do you define how good do you have to be? Or, is it just a little bit good or a lot good? Or and so that to me gives you nothing to stand on. I'm not going to spend eternity in heaven because of how good I was. I'm going to spend eternity in heaven because how good Jesus was. Because He took my place. He died for me when I should be the one experiencing death and eternal separation from God. He experienced that for me. And so... that's what I'd say.
Okay, very cool. So what I'm going to do, with this podcast, we do a section called the bonus interview section, where we do a little bit more fun questions. So I put the fire under your feet tonight. So we're going to do stuff that's a little bit more laid back.
Yeah.
Before we get there, you brought in a ton of notes. You didn't know what exactly we were going to talk about, but you took a ton of notes. Is there anything we didn't cover that you would like to cover? Any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I do actually. 2 things. How much time do we have?
Go for it.
So the first thing is, I kind of answered it earlier about, we were talking about moral authority and why someone should believe in God, and obviously it's way more than moral authority. Like for example, I have a health condition. It's a colon condition, and basically it's much more than this, but just the gist of it. I bleed internally continuously. I've been that way for like 13 years. It's terrible, horrible disease that affects my life in every way you could possibly imagine. And like, I don't care who you are, when you're in a situation, and like there's no cure, it's incurable, I've taken every medicine there is to take, there's nothing else to take. And so I'm utterly hopeless. There's nothing that can help me. And I think every person I don't care who you are, when you're in that state where you're completely out of control and there's nothing you can do in your own strength, I think in our very nature, we say, if there's a God in heaven, if there's something bigger than me, I need your help. I need you to do something, And so it's just, I can't tell you how much of a source of strength the I'm going to use the word knowledge, but it's really faith, if you're being honest. In having a faith in something that has the power to do anything. And man, I've been in some dark moments physically, and all I could do was just cry out to God, not begging, but just saying, Lord, Father, I'm your son, and I need your help. And he's always showed up and helped me do what I couldn't do on my own. And I think everyone deep down, the problem is you're just not in a low enough place. Get you low enough, and you're going to cry out something bigger. And it's been that way for all of humanity. There's no people, no nation, no tribe in the history of mankind that has not said, there's something bigger than me, you know. And I think that's just, you can't replace that. So the last thing is like just from a science perspective. So most people say that science disproves God, but I would say in our current scientific era, we are finding more and more science that points to God. So like, for example, they have this thing called a hadron accelerator, and it's in Geneva, where they've created it's like a 17-mile particle collider or something like that. And so when that thing started, they started with the premise that the atom was the smallest unit, of matter or whatever. So they've been running all these experiments where they're smashing particles into each other at light speed and replicating basically the beginning of the universe, the Big Bang sort of, what happens when these particles hit each other and they expand and all this kind of stuff. And each time as they continue to do these tests, they found that there's smaller and smaller and smaller particles, and they don't even know how small it's going to go. It just keeps unraveling new things. And whereas we used to think, oh, we got this down, this is it. It just keeps opening. It just keeps opening. And they're it's literally redefining what we know about physics. On a sub-particle level, things aren't behaving like they do in our natural state of physics. Things are acting differently. They've even discovered recently that photon particles that can be either waves or particles. It can be a wave. I don't know how to. I'm not going to bog you down in details, but it's two different representations of the same particle. They're different completely. This is going to blow your mind, but they found that according to where the photon is going to end up, it will change in the past it'll change itself before it gets to the destination, and that the destination actually determines its form. So if it's going to be tested for a waveform at the end of the journey, it'll manifest as a waveform in the journey before it gets to the end. Same thing if they're looking for a particle, it'll manifest as a particle. Every time they ask a wave question, it shows a wave. If they ask this particle question, it shows a particle behavior. And it's whoa,
Wait, so can you give an analogy for that? So
say there was a brick wall in front of you or whatever. Let's say you could only punch through the brick wall, but then there was another steel wall that you had to be invisible. Now remember, these aren't people; it's particles.
Yeah.
So if they put up a brick wall every time it punches through, if they put up a steel wall every time it floats through, invisible. So it can't see the world. There's no eyes, there's no brain, there's no nothing. But somehow, according to what you put in front of it, it changes to meet that. And a photon is a light beam. It's like a beam of light from the sun. And so basically, it's changing according to its destination, which is, it's just, when you think about it, it's insane. But it's not insane when you kind of think about it in the course of the Bible or whatever, where God says, "I'm faithful to bring you to completion. If I've started a good work in you, I'm going to bring you to completion." Almost as if because He knows the end and because He's designed you to reach the end, you're actually on your current course. You're actually making the decisions that you're going to make, doing the things that you're going to do because you're going to end up saved in heaven with the Father forever. You know what I mean? It gets crazy, but the Bible talks about predestination to a degree where because God knows what our choices are going to be, and it's super complicated. But my point is, if God knows the end, then He can set the path. You know what I mean? The form your life's going to take. That's nowhere in science or anything. This is brand new information. I've read articles reputable articles where they found protons that literally teleport within the nucleus of the cell. They just show up in different spaces instantaneously. There's no path. It's just boom, there.
Yeah.
You know, like, and the Bible talks about God doing these things. You know, this definition of natural law is that it's falls into natural things. If you go out of natural law, which is all these things we're talking about, it's technically supernatural. You know, like that's a supernatural occurrence.
Okay. Yeah.
So we're like, it's like we look at the Bible and be like, oh, that's supernatural. Like it never happened. But we're discovering that supernatural clearly exists. It doesn't exist in how we think of it, where somebody's leg grows back because Jesus prays for him. But on a subatomic level, supernatural things happen all the time. So if they do there, why couldn't they there under the power that rules those laws? You know.
Yeah.
So, that's my last thing.
That's your last thought?
Yeah.
Okay, very cool. OJ, did you have any questions that you wanted to... You're good?
I wish I could look at that context one more time of that other question. You will not see death.
Oh, yeah.
I want to look it up and look at it again and just review it.
Yeah, I'm sure there have been lots of people who've written about it. But cool. But let's...
That'd be a tough one to write about.
That would be a tough one to write about. But I'm sure, knowing how many scholars there are out there, I'm sure there are people that have opinions on it. So yeah, let's...
That was a great question, though, by the way.
Yeah? You like that?
Yeah, really good. Pick the one verse in the whole Bible. I'm like, no one knows that one. No one knows.
Yeah. So I was trying to find some good ones. So all right. So we've done the hard stuff. Thanks. You did good. You can breathe easy. All the hard stuff's going. Let's do the bonus interview section. Have a little fun. And so my first question for you: what fictional character is amazing in their book, show, or movie, but would be insufferable if you had to deal with them in mundane, everyday situations?
What fictional character?
Yeah, that
This
would
is a
just
tough one, man.
would annoy you.
You know who kind of annoys me a little bit is have you seen the new series on Netflix, Iron Fist?
No, but I've heard it's awful.
I mean, it's good, but the main character is like always brooding all the time.
Okay.
You know? It's always like,
I don't want to deal with
he's always like pouting and stuff. You know, I'm like, you're a superhero, bro. Like,
you belong in a manga.
Man up. You know? Like he's always like meditating with like a scowl.
Okay, very cool.
It's terrible.
So Iron Fist would be the person that you wouldn't be able to deal with on a day-to-day basis. Okay, question number 2. If you were If you were transported 400 years into the past with nothing, no clothes, nothing, like Terminator, boom, you got transported back in time, how would you prove that you were from the future?
How would I prove I was from the future? So how many years are we talking?
400.
400 years. So that would be like pre-America. So I'd probably be in like Europe or something, right? Let me think. How would I prove it? 1492. That's when Columbus sailed the ocean blue. So I'd be like, I bet you guys that the Earth is round. I promise you. This dude's about to go check it out.
And then you get burned at a stake.
I bet you 1 million rupees, whatever. Yeah. The Earth is round.
Yeah.
And when he gets back, I'm getting paid.
That's hilarious.
That's
Perfect. That's hilarious. That's a better answer than I would have given. What happens when you get scared half to death twice?
Scared half to death twice? What do you mean, like in a row?
I don't know. It's just a stupid question.
Yeah.
Because people say, you scared me half to death. What happens if you get scared twice half to death?
Yeah, I'm dead. I guess I die right there.
I guess you die. What is a body part that you wouldn't mind losing?
I wouldn't mind losing?
Yeah.
Jeez. I kind of like all my body parts.
You had to give one up.
I'm going to say an ear because...
Okay.
I don't want to say wouldn't mind, but like if I had to choose. Yeah.
It'd be like an ear.
Right, because
Okay.
You can still hear even if you don't have an ear.
Yeah.
And then you can put a fake one on and you're good.
There's fake ears?
Yeah.
I didn't know
Absolutely.
this. Like
yeah.
prosthetic ears?
Mm-hmm.
Oh. I think that's cheating, but we'll give it to you.
If I lose a limb, I'm not just going to go without it. I'm going to find an alternate.
That's fair.
Yeah.
I get that's fair. That's fair. Maybe this joke or maybe this question is in bad taste, but if you were a cannibal, Would you be cool with eating clowns, or would you be afraid they would taste funny?
Well, I know they taste funny because of makeup on. Have you ever had makeup in your mouth? It's disgusting.
It was a joke. They taste funny. 'Cause they're clowns. Wah, wah. That was
bad.
poor delivery on my part.
I didn't even get it.
Poor delivery. All right. What ridiculous thing has someone tricked you into doing or believing?
Doing or believing? What's a ridiculous thing I've done? I can't think of anything I've done that's ridiculous, but I've been requested to do ridiculous things that I turned down. Like I think
That's not as much fun. That's not as much fun. I know someone was able to manipulate me into kissing my own mother on a stage in front of
that was
people.
me. That was awesome.
I don't even remember what I did to you to make you.
That was the best thing ever. You kissed your mom in front of a crowd of people. You didn't know it. You thought I was a girl. I was just some random girl.
Yeah, it was like a girl I had a crush on, and he had her on stage.
It was your mom.
Anyways, it was my mom. It was definitely not.
And did we ask you like
girl.
rate the kiss or something like that?
I don't know.
I think we did.
I was like, I could have done without the tongue.
That's not true for the record.
That's not true. That's not true. Before we finish up this episode, I just wanted to thank Pastor Erik Brown for joining us. He just had a newborn, and so for him to take some time and spend it with us means a lot. I also wanted to thank OJ Knight for producing this episode and Soulish for doing our music. If you haven't already, please subscribe on iTunes and leave a review. It would mean a lot to us. Also, please share this podcast with some friends to help us get the word out about this podcast. Last but not least, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to listen to this episode of Reaching Out with Zack Carter. Have a great day, and we will see you next time.